Great. I think we'll get started. So, hi everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I hope you all have a coffee or tea for this. I'll try and swing through all of this in the next half hour or less. But we have a fair amount to get through, so I'll do my best to make it as useful and informative as possible. But as we do run through, a quick disclaimer: my team will be manning the chat. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in there, and we'll do our best to get to them throughout the duration of the sort of presentation itself. So really what we're talking about today, as you can see, is related to us as a business, how we enable or help to enable research teams and empower patients in clinical trials through some of our innovative technologies, solutions, and services that we provide. So first things first, though, I thought it'd be helpful to introduce myself. My name's Theo Wiley, and I'm commercial lead here at Sano Genetics. I've spent the best part of the last decade leading commercial teams for organizations that are working closely with a broad gamut of pharmaceutical and life sciences departments to support with things like research, market penetration, medical communication. So I've spent time with commercial and marketing teams at large pharma, as well as the bulk of my work actually with medical affairs teams, helping to better understand and map relationships with key opinion leaders, and now with Sano working a little bit more closely with clinical operations teams and development teams to help accelerate and de-risk programs to ultimately enable better outcomes for patients and for sponsors. So my personal background is in human biosciences, genetics and nutrition. And as a personal aside, I suffer from genetic hearing loss. So I have profound hearing loss on my right side, which makes the work that we do here at Sano very close to home. So speaking of which, I thought it'd be useful to start from what is ultimately a 10,000 foot view, setting the scene a little bit to think about what we mean when we talk about precision medicine, or personalized medicine, or healthcare. And to use the commonly provided definition, precision medicine is an innovative approach for tailoring disease treatment and prevention to the individual. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty broad concept, right? But really, there are two avenues that you'll pick out from that statement, one in treatment and the other in prevention. So talking about prevention, really that's the utopia that you see on your screen there that we're all striving for. That is, how can we best tackle a disease before the symptoms even manifest, and perhaps even prevent it occurring at all. But today, that's not currently the case. Precision medicine is really about how can we better treat an individual with a condition or disease by understanding things about them beyond just the symptomology that they're experiencing, because ultimately a disease is simply a categorization of a set of symptoms that have helped us for centuries or millennia to determine a cause or presentation, a cause or course of treatment, right? So by extension, precision medicine methodologies today look at things beyond the surface level presentation. There are there other measurements we can make to help us get even more granular about what method of treatment might have the optimal effect? So for example, as you see here, we can look at underlying genetics of an individual, or going one step further, the genetic sequence of the tumor or bacteria that's causing a condition in a human. And if we understand those things in more detail, we might be able to provide a compound or virus that's specifically designed to target that molecule or genetic sequence, for instance. So think about things like gene therapies. So we can often look at biomarkers beyond that, like levels of protein in the blood, or more digitally speaking, or for digital biomarkers, heart rate variability, for example. So lifestyle factors like that can play a role. Lifestyle factors beyond that, can play a role as well, as can the environment that you live in, pollution levels, activity level, your medical history, what treatments you've had in the past, family history, how common is a certain condition in that family tree, disease presentation, and more. But breaking it down really into its most basic form, precision medicine or personalized medicine is simply a method for categorizing those sort of larger clumps of individuals into certain buckets to ensure that we can optimize treatment outcomes. So over time, we can get more and more granular and even more targeted as research and detection technologies become much more advanced. So perhaps even down to developing or manufacturing that drug specifically for an N of 1, but Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet, but hopefully we will be in the next few years. So beyond just treatment of disease, there are also sort of a host of other benefits to applying this precision medicine mindset in healthcare. For example, number two, we've covered number one. Number two on the slide here, by accurately pre-screening and categorizing patients before care provision, we can significantly reduce things like unwanted side effects. So a great example of where this has been currently applied is in tamoxifen, which is a drug that's commonly provided to prevent breast cancer, which from a drug perspective is largely inexpensive, but it's also highly toxic to about 31% of the population. So by anticipating those side effects, by understanding that intersection between physiology and drug interactions through something like metabolomics or genomic sequencing, we can reduce the possibility of potentially severe adverse events. So point three also relates to the reduced time, the cost and failure rate of pharmaceutical clinical trials, where we've seen around a 2 to 3x increase in the success rates of clinical trials where they do include some form of biomarker screening beforehand. And from a post-market perspective too, precision medicine can eliminate the trial and error inefficiencies that tend to inflate healthcare costs and undermine patient care. So like in the female contraception space, right? It's largely a trial and error process, and we're starting to see some sort of personalized medicine approaches and clinical care tools that sort of support the decision making for those. So finally, one last point we have here talks about how we can leverage research like large-scale genetic sequencing data to illuminate novel therapeutic targets for further development of treatment. So doing things like improve disease detection as well, prevent susceptibility to disease, and so on. And on that last point, where we see, as a business and largely as a group, where we see benefits to applying precision medicine technologies is right across that spectrum of disease prevalence. So everything from rare and ultra rare conditions all the way to the complexities of highly prevalent common diseases. So on the rare side, there's a possibility for curability for conditions, perhaps that might be, for instance, monogenic in nature, where we could potentially leverage technologies like gene therapy, small molecules, or gene editing. And then from a common disease perspective, at Sano, we really anticipate a day where we can firstly identify these genetic subtypes of common disease, whereby you don't just have one condition, but you have much more granular diagnoses based on specific variables, like in LRRK2 positive Parkinson's disease, for instance. And we can also use data to help prevent these highly prevalent, complex, often polygenic diseases before they manifest through things like polygenic risk scores and so on. So we're covering sort of both sides of that prevention and the treatment too. So we've established what precision medicine is. We've established why we want that panacea, but surely a lot of this is common sense, making personalized treatment decisions, right? It is absolutely where we want to be, but there's a variety of reasons why this simply has not been possible until the last decade or so. The key variables in this, in my opinion, of course, that are all pretty intertwined and very, very much generic across many industries, right, is technology, research, and cost. So technology-wise, really, we simply haven't had the ability to run some of the complex testing like whole genome sequencing until the last 15 to 20 years. And even then, it's been prohibitively expensive to do at any reasonable scale. So that's meant even if we could run this testing, there simply isn't enough data or research to make significantly meaningful observations because in science, as with many areas, we require validity and reliability, which means repeatability. So from a cost perspective, that becomes challenging. And finally, when you think about cost, something like whole genome sequencing has only recently become feasible to do at scale. And when we think back 20 years to the Human Genome Project, where they sequenced the first genome, it cost upwards of $100 million to sequence just one individual, right? So now, as you see on the graph here, it's sunk somewhere below $1,000 per whole genome sequence. So ideally, in the near future, we'd expect this sort of massive uptick in the use of this technology over time, and more data points, more research to be conducted, and things like speed of testing to come down over the next decade. So that brings us to today, and why Sano really exists as a business beyond the blue sky benefit of contributing to this industry. But our clients, whether they are clinical operations teams at pharma or biotech businesses, or running these large-scale research programs, people generally, or individuals and companies running these precision medicine programs, tend to face this catch-22, whereby you often require large numbers of genetically profiled patients, or just generally biomarker profiled patients, or profile patients in some capacity. But testing is generally not standard of care for most diseases, especially when it's a new technology. So few patients are tested, which means in order to enroll patients in a trial, clinical development teams need to both find the patients themselves and then test them, which is expensive and burdensome, because operations teams need to develop their own patient finding programs for every trial, which means they also have to coordinate with multiple vendors and partners in every geography. So, and it's also important to consider, right, that some conditions are complex and lack homogeneity. So there are limited sample sizes and diversity of patients, and you combine that with sort of high screen failure rates. You also have to think about things like additional data privacy and ethical concerns when you're dealing with like such personal and complex data sets and so on. So as you can imagine, all of these problems contribute to trouble with things like patient finding, pre-screening, enrollment, and retention as well. So what do? We actually do all three of those things. So we support clinical development teams with patient finding and recruitment, developing overall strategy, and leveraging this sort of an omni-channel approach with that, with also pre-screening and consent baked in. And then we can offer our expertise in a range of areas to support with things like biomarker testing strategy, genetic testing services, and integrate with any labs that you're already using. And finally, our platform technology features a virtual waiting room for research participants to support with sort of long-term patient engagement and retention. It helps you to sort of maintain regular touch points to keep participants in the loop while waiting for perhaps the next step of the study, and sites themselves can also help sort of better manage their patient logistics and relationships. So diving into the details a little bit with respect to how we support patient finding and recruitment for clinical studies, this graphic should hopefully help set the scene a little. This might be familiar to some of you and perhaps not so much to others, but ultimately the approach we take is fairly novel because of the unique challenges associated with running precision medicine studies in particular. So you can imagine yourselves, assuming most of the individuals on this call are sort of in the clinical development area, but our service is really outlined by the orange and purple sections in this graphic. So as an overview, one of the central principles of our work is to sit down with our clients at the beginning of a project and develop an independent patient finding protocol, which sits completely independently of your central clinical trial protocol. And this really helps in a couple of ways. Firstly, it prevents or mitigates the need for delays to the trial itself or for any changes to the patient finding or recruitment approach, which are often required. And second, you can think of it as an umbrella protocol that sits across the entire clinical development lifecycle. So that section in green. So in essence, we can identify and build a pre-qualified pool of patients ready for enrollment while your trial is ongoing. Sort of, well, when your trial is ready, right? When you're ready to accept patients, we can have a group of patients almost ready to go. And we can also be actively identifying patients for your phase 3 whilst your phase 2 is also ongoing. So the intent there is to then reduce the white space between trial phases to speed up that rate of transition, and overall reducing the cost of recruitment pretty dramatically. So as we run through these patient finding programs, all the individuals that we identify go through a pre-screening and consent process through our platform that then supports with segmentation of patients based on their suitability. Plus, these people, regardless of whether they screen in or out, live on our virtual waiting room platform, which is ultimately a dedicated location for patients where they receive consistent communication about their status in a trial, the progress of testing, educational content about their condition, perhaps guided support through either genetic counselors or through a human liaison, and much, much more. So being this sort of patient-centric organization, it's important for Sano to give patients access to potentially life-saving medicines and trial opportunities that they likely wouldn't otherwise have access to. So if they screen out of one particular customer program, we keep them up to date through recontact and connect them with other research programs that they might be eligible for. So with all that, I know I've given you a sneak preview of the next slide anyway. Where do these patients come from initially? Well, really, we take this, what we describe as an omni-channel approach towards patient finding, which is written into the protocol at project onset. So on the left side of your screen here, we have a number of typical channels that we utilize that tend to change based on the nuances of a specific indication or market that you're running your trial in. Things like genetic databases, medical record analysis, patient organizations, online media, etc. And then all of these individuals, as mentioned, get pushed through our patient pre-screening software through our platform. And if required, some form of biomarker testing too. So then every patient or participant is segmented automatically by our software into relevant cohorts based on predefined parameters for stratification that we'd work with you closely to define. And part of the additional benefit, or you could say differentiators in the way that we work, that we're constantly optimizing our approach to patient finding and making these mid-course corrections where necessary to optimize for hit rate. So we provide these real-time analytics on the channels that we're seeing success into our platform interface for customer visibility. And you can also see which sites are bringing in the most patients. Can we encourage others to, perhaps why are they falling behind? What do we expect of them, etc. So we're improving relationships all across the board of sort of that vendor infrastructure or trial program logistical nightmare that we all experience. So when it comes to biomarker testing support, there are two arms really of how we collaborate with our clients in this regard. So one is offering a tech integrated end-to-end genetic testing service ourselves, where we provide at-home genetic testing kits, logistics services, genomic sequencing, genetic counseling, analysis and reporting, expertise, consulting, etc. And on the other hand, we work with many clients that might already have a testing provider, whether that's genetic or otherwise, might be biomarker testing, especially when we're looking at things like biomarker testing that's a proprietary panel that's been built and is ultimately private. We can also integrate through those additional labs through an API if we want to store that data on our system in the patient profiles. And that could be through one-way or two-way integration. How do we want to be bouncing that information back and forward, if at all? And we can support with things like patient journey mapping, interception points between our platform and the patient testing, and secure storage of test results within, as I say, the patient profiles that we have. So our genetic testing service in-house, the stuff on the left side of your screen here, looks a little like this. So we provide non-invasive salivary at-home genetic testing kits to support with patient finding and rapid screening, whilst reducing burden on both patients and sites by making that testing much more and readily accessible. So instead of them going on site directly, they can do it from the comfort of their own homes. It's non-invasive, etc. And we can offer a variety of different methods on sequencing too. So whether that's perhaps, as you can see, we do whole exome, whole genome, genotyping, etc., all that fun stuff. But also having part of this conversation with our clients as well is what do we want to use that testing for? So we can offer both research use only and clinical grade testing, depending on the specific requirements of the program that we're collaborating on. Because if we're thinking about interventional trials, we've got to be smart about how we implement a process like this to make sure it's entirely economical. Do you want to use testing as your screening criteria, and then any patients that get through that then receive a clinical grade test? We've got to make sure, especially if we're treating patients in most markets, there's a requirement for a clinical grade test. So balancing out that strategy of Do we do both? Do we do one? Do we do just clinical grade? Something to consider, and ultimately it's a budget equation for many of our clients too on that front. So a quick overview of or flow diagram of how one of our programs might look. We have a number of patient access channels on the front end that I showed you earlier, just a couple of examples that we might leverage for a specific disease, for instance. And then we have pre-screening. It's powered by the Sano platform. And then, we have this additional arm, as you see here, bolted on for testing partners to be integrated into the methodology. Again, this isn't always a prerequisite for the programs that we work on, but it's something that we can absolutely do. And then patients flow through into two main categories, really, in this case, relevant or not relevant for the planned program. And then they'll, on an individual basis, receive a personalized journey, depending on which segments or cohorts that they're attached to. So coming into the long-term engagement portion of our offering, this is really where our platform and service gets tied together. So in essence, all patients that flow through every arm of the study, regardless if they screen in or out, will be led to their very own virtual patient waiting room experience. And from here, participants then receive direct communications through email, SMS, even direct phone calls from our dedicated patient engagement team, as well as access to a host of resources like blogs, articles, and educational material about their condition, their results of testing. They can book site visits, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen and take you through a quick little demo of our platform and what it looks like for the participant themselves. So what you can see on the screen now, hopefully if I'm sharing the right screen, and double check, yep, all good, is our study page. And we'll set a dedicated version of one of these up for every study that we work on. Really, it's a unique URL that's hosted on our platform that's specific to the program that we would be working with one of our clients on. So this is a recent one we ran on a study on genetics and CKD, chronic kidney disease, in non-diabetic cases. And really, it's a location for an individual to arrive based on their criteria for suitability for this study. And they might have arrived on this from a conversation with their HCP. It might be from an educational piece of material, or it might be through online media. Ultimately, it's a centralized location for study participants to be screened in or out based on their suitability. And as you can see, as we scroll down, there's pieces of information about the study itself, there's study details, where's it located, why should they take part, what are the benefits, who the sponsor is, what are they going to do with my personal information, and some frequently asked questions too. So what they do, you hit take part. I've just created an account already, so I have no need to create a new one, but usually an individual will be prompted to create an account based on their email. But I'll go and start over on the flow. So the central premise of our pre-screening process is ultimately it's a questionnaire with lots of different abilities, or what we call blocks, and different question formats or types. And those might be things like single choice, multiple choice, survey questions, free text, age ranges, birth dates, etc. And what we sit down with our clients and do is map out what would we like these different flows of different blocks, and blocks again are the question types. Those flows, what logic, ultimately what are the outputs we want to get is different cohorts. And those questions can help us to define where those cohorts result. And so we build these little streams up with each of our clients to help end up with really clean groups of patients out the back end that are either suitable or not suitable for a study. So I'll just run through a few examples of the questions that we get here. Of course, they're pre-populated because I've already gone through this flow already. But you can see as I scroll through, there's a variety of different types of questions that we can have. And again, these are examples of different blocks, and the flows are ultimately hidden to me as a participant But what the back end of our system is doing is starting to categorize these individuals and show up different blocks of questions based on my answers to the previous questions. So there's several different sections we can set up. This is unique to chronic kidney disease. Again, this is a slightly different type of block that we have. But anything that would be required for a study of your kind, we're more than happy to build something in and figure out a workaround of how we can do that. And this is all baked in with consent too, right? So whether it's a physical e-signature or whether it's simply a button to submit consent, we have that baked into the platform too. I'm not going to hit consent, otherwise it will stop me from demoing these flows again. But really, after I've run through this whole flow, answered all the questions that I've been asked to, I arrive on what is our virtual waiting room platform. And again, what this platform and technology is really trying to do is boost the levels of engagement through clinical trials. So we all know the leaky bucket story, but it's true. We have to do a better job as an industry to prevent patients from feeling isolated, get them better access to education, to peers, and also simply better access to care and research opportunities that may offer, in some cases, this life-saving alternative. So we're super passionate about this aspect, following an endless stream of messages from patients saying that they feel like they get lost into a black hole in the experience of being part of a trial. They've only heard that they were a carrier of a dangerous genetic trait after the study came out, and the list goes on. So what we have in our virtual waiting room is a variety of different pieces of content components that will help boost the retention and engagement levels of these patients over time. So we have peer support programs, we have articles and blogs that are baked in here, and individuals can learn more. They can ask questions to our team. They can also, the system for this specific study is prompting me to go through our DNA test ordering flow based on my responses to the previous pre-screening survey. So effectively, I've been identified as a potentially relevant individual. So I hit begin survey, and really what that is me providing some additional context, address, etc. And then we can ping out a kit directly to there. And the logistics is built in to the back end of this platform too. So it's all automated. You don't have to worry at all. You can be completely hands off, and all of this will be pinged off to the labs. And ultimately, as a sponsor, you don't have to get too into the nitty-gritty details of how those sort of logistics get done. So coming back to the presentation itself a little bit, going finally to sort of the sort of touching on the administrative side of some of these studies, like I just mentioned. Our platform is also self-serve enabled. So for customers that don't require that full white glove support level, our system can facilitate the setup of a study in seconds through the admin portal. But we don't quite have enough time to run through that part of our tool today, and that will have to be another topic for another webinar. But finally, I wanted to touch on or talk over a couple of examples of our case studies, both of which we'll provide links to in the description for you to sort of take a deeper dive through rather than me walking over them. But on one recent Parkinson's disease project, we identified over 95% of participants for a study with a genetic variant that's present in less than 2% of Parkinson's disease cases. And we, in fact, doubled the hit rate of identified patients by maximizing our patient finding strategies and then optimizing those where appropriate to reduce the screen failure rate. And then secondly, a case where we've sort of flipped this exercise on its head a little bit. We have grant funding for a program which we call Light the Way, which is in collaboration with some other individuals in the space. It's a free online platform for patients that's supported by, as I say, grant funded and grant funding in the UK and industry partners, where we're offering genetic testing, genetic counseling for people at risk of genetic ALS. So we're running genetic testing for free for all of those individuals, and we're partnering with many industry sponsors to help bring this to sort of multinational level. So we're starting in the UK and the US. We'll be launching in the US early next year. We're just about to launch in the UK for this study, and the intent is really to build up these pre-qualified cohorts of individuals, but also in an area where it's such a rapidly developing disease area, we want to give a peer community to those individuals. We also want to potentially open the door for preventative treatments to be developed for individuals that have family members that have already been diagnosed or suffering with ALS or MND. So please do get in touch if you're interested. And then in terms of other areas that we work in, we work across the board. Ultimately, our process is disease area agnostic. So we work across neurology, oncology in some cases, immunology, nephrology, hepatology, and more. So areas typically where there tends to be more research around the genetic side. But of course, as I mentioned, genetics is not the only thing that we're focused on, although it's in our name. We work in lots of cases where, again, there's some other form of biomarker testing or no testing at all. It's simply a different kind of approach where we're building these pre-qualified patient registries to really rapidly enhance the patient identification and recruitment process for clinical trials. So I've talked about this a little bit. But what's in it for patient and carers and caregivers, and why do they love us, really? And we do mean love. So fundamentally, we're a patient-centric organization. So our reason for being is to make the patient journey frictionless and to accelerate the precision medicine research on their behalf. So one thing is we provide patients with rare conditions or non-rare conditions, even better access to potentially life-saving treatments, trials, and medicines. Second, patients feel more heard, less isolated, and understand their health and conditions significantly better. And lastly, they trust us to keep their data safe as we're dealing with some of the most personal of personal data. So, we have their best interests at heart, and ultimately they own all of their data and they're able to retract and control their data from their patient platform account. So that's me. That's been Sano Genetics, talking a little bit about the services and technologies that we offer to pharma and our life sciences clients. You can contact me on the information here, but if you'd like to schedule a demo, we'd be more than happy to have a quick chat to see if we can support some of your programs that are ongoing. So also, if we didn't manage to get to your questions in the chat, we will drop you a quick email just to follow up as we have your details, and we can make sure we're getting to those questions at the right time. So much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much.